back. I'm going to buckle up for this one.
I've got some peeps too. So my topic is what should I eat? And I want to refer to one of Lizette's slides. One of the last ones she had up there was the primitive man, and she mentioned that primitive man didn't have to deal with being stressed, wasn't bitter, it wasn't bored. I think you said not a lot of indignation. Is that how you said it?
Yeah.
Primitive man didn't have to deal with trans fats either. Didn't have to deal with gluten-free. Didn't have to deal with probiotics. Low in saturated fat, cage-free, range-free, all natural. Actually, I guess everything was all natural. I don't think he had to deal with those kinds of issues. And of course, things have changed. They've changed a lot now. That's where we shop. We shop in grocery stores that have as many as 60,000 products. And those 60,000 products have labels that have 10 things on them we have to sort of figure out. And sometimes there are ingredients lists with 50 things on it that we have to try to figure out. And it's confusing. It's challenging to keep up with. And perhaps you might say to yourself, well, maybe I ought to get a book so that I can read about these things. And yesterday I went on Amazon and I typed in nutrition books. 69,000 nutrition books on Amazon. So maybe you say, I want to narrow the playing field a little bit, so you go to your local bookstore. And that's one of 4 shelves, that has books on nutrition and weight control and other things. And there was a guest on our program not too long ago who said to me, wrong information, it's difficult to get a handle on these things. And so I think there's a tendency to be confused. How many of you have gotten confused at times about what to eat?
Definitely.
It's difficult to keep up with it. And what happens to your behavior? What do you do when you're confused?
You unplug.
You what? You unplug. You unplug. The tendency is to do one of 2 things. The tendency is to shut down, is to do nothing, to be immobile. We had a guest on our program once who said, Bob, I'm going to keep eating what I'm eating because someday I'll be right. They'll catch up with me. I thought that was an interesting perspective. And I like this quote, actually, is this phrase, unwise, better, best. And here's what I mean by this. In most situations where food is available, there are choices. You walk in the grocery store, there's lots of choices. You go to a restaurant, there's lots of choices. You're sitting in an airport, there are options and choices available. Sometimes there aren't any great choices. There's not a lot of great choices in a convenience store, but are there choices in a convenience store? So what I would encourage you to do is, rather than getting focused on all the details, let me back up for a second and say that if any of you have a serious health issue, if you have diabetes, if you have hypertension, if you have celiac, then you need to be getting good advice from your doctors, maybe more importantly, your registered dietitians, and following the advice that these professionals provide, because it can have a big impact on your quality of life. But I want to talk more general today, and what I would encourage you to do is to think in terms of, when I have the opportunity to choose, categorize those into the unwise, better, best choice. So let me give you an example. Let's say we all go to a restaurant together. It's on Robert, by the way. Let's say we all go to a restaurant together, and there's a table here, and I order 10 entrees, and I give you a piece of paper and a pencil, and I ask you to categorize those choices. Or, let me back up. I ask you to estimate the calories, the fat grams, and milligrams of sodium in each of those entrees. How close could you come? Nowhere near. I'll let you know. Nowhere near. And the reason I don't think you could is that dietitians could. There's a recent study that came out and found that dietitians had a difficult time looking at food at a restaurant and estimating those things. But if I asked you to categorize those entrees into the unwise, better, or best choices, could you do that? I think you could. Now, you may not know how many calories or grams of saturated fat or milligrams of sodium, but if you raised the bar, if you began to make better choices consistently than you used to make, over time, would you save all those things? And that's really what I'd like you to consider doing, is to think in terms of moving in the right direction or moving in a better direction. So I've got a couple examples of this. And so we'll show a few of these. In fact, Ralph Nader calls hot dogs America's deadliest missile. It's not a particularly healthy food. But every time I go to that Major League Baseball game Adam was talking about, what do I get? I get a hot dog. And unfortunately for me as a baseball fan, the closest team is Atlanta Braves. They're 4.5 hours away, but maybe good for my health, they're 4.5 hours away. I don't get there very often. In fact, I went to my first, if a friend of yours invites you over for dinner and they give you, and they serve you a chicken tortilla with a white flour tortilla, eat it. And once in a while, it's not milk. It's the quantity and frequency of milk. It's not hot dogs. It's the quantity and frequency of hot dogs. If you have lobster once a year, don't use fat-free margarine. Drawn butter is what you want to use. How many of you, like I, grew up in a family where we went out to dinner very infrequently? Very infrequently. Going out to dinner had no impact on my health. It had very little impact on my parents' health. They didn't go out very often. 95% of what we ate was prepared in the home. That's what made the biggest difference. If you go out 4 or 5 times a year, forget about it. Eat what you want. If you go out 4 or 5 times a week, does it matter? It matters. It's not going out, it's the quantity of food you're exposed to, the frequency you go out. And so that's really the connection. The connection here is that the greater the quantity and the greater the frequency you're exposed to something, the bigger the impact it's going to have. I think part of the problem in health and nutrition and weight is that we're trying to pick every battle and do everything right, and I think we ought to pick our battles more effectively. It's the things you do the most that have the biggest impact. So for those of you that do go out often, yeah, you got to take it seriously when you eat out. And I know Lyle, as he sort of played on that, about how you can go forward. It's not about doing it right. It's not right or wrong. It's not good or bad. It's not being on or off the diet. Is, am I moving in a healthy, better direction? And if you make better choices over time, you may have no clue how many calories or milligrams of sodium or the amount of trans fats, but are you moving in the right direction? And I think that's what this is all about. Let's all move in the right direction. Thank you.